All right. Hello again, adventurers. Sorry, I had a hair or something. Hi. It's another exciting did a daily vlog. I think this is daily vlog number 250. I did a don't know. At this point, I did a don't care. I am still sick as a dog. Um, but I am slowly getting better. Like, the last a few days when I wake up, I feel like I'm dead. And then today, when I woke up, I just feel like I wanted to die. So I think that's a progression. I'm still not doing good right now. But the meds are working. Tylenol and Advil are wonderful, especially when you can't actually go to a doctor to get real medication. They work wonders. And they're also just about to start wearing off. So this may be kind of short because I may have to take more meds. Today, I wanted to talk about my first impressions of D&D 5.5. The new rule book has come out. If you have a master's tier subscription, you have access to it. My understanding is that the early access wasn't supposed to go live until tomorrow, but as of Wednesday, I have had access to it, as have all of my players, because I have them in campaigns with book sharing activated. So, yeah, I have started looking through the new Player's Handbook, and two things pop out most obvious to me. Now, I have not read through absolutely everything. There were certain areas that I read every single word. There are other places that I just kind of skimmed, and then there are some chapters that I just haven't even looked at all. I'm planning on doing an in-depth review of it, but I wanted to get my initial thoughts out there, just to see if I'm the only one that thinks this. So, if you've had a chance to look at the new Player's Handbook, chime in the comments below to see if you agree with me. So, the first thing that I was actually very happy about, remember I mentioned before the most important announcement that they made about it was that Chapter 1 was now how to play the game. And that means that D&D is no longer being marketed solely to D&D players. They actually want new people to be able to play, which is great. Something that I have been fighting for a long time with a lot of other companies, where I tell them flat out, please tell us how to play your game before you give us character options, because otherwise the character options don't make sense. When reading through Chapter 1, there's also a massive difference between Chapter 1 of the 2024 Player's Handbook, and I have to really, come on, I have to remember which chapter it was. Effectively Chapter 7 of the original Player's Handbook, though quite a few of the things that show up in Chapter 1 also showed up in Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. But probably the biggest change is how the game is described in the This Is How You Play. There are a lot of examples. Like, they will explain an idea, and then they will give examples of how it works in a real game, where they'll have the dungeon master and a couple players they'll just write out which each one says to give examples. From a training perspective, this is essential training methodology. A good trainer, once they explain something, especially something complex, they will immediately give you a real world example of how it is utilized, because that makes it that much easier for you to understand the why behind the what. And that increases retention and replicability. So overall, Chapter 1 of the new 24 Player's Handbook is probably the best written introduction on how to play D&D I have ever seen. It's obvious they brought somebody in that had an understanding of training and education and had them kind of revamp how they explain everything. That was very, very nice. I like that. Everything else about this book feels significantly more limited. And what I mean by that is, in the same way that Monsters of the Multiverse is a significantly more limited version of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and the other one that I can't remember. That's basically the same thing that happened here. If you look at any character description or class description and compare it to the equivalent class description in the 2014 Player's Handbook, you'll notice that the 2024 versions of every single characters are significantly shorter. They have less words in them. And the reason why, there is almost no flavor in any of anything here. This is a book about mechanics. And so everything that they describe, they don't add any flavor to it whatsoever. They don't give you the kind of in-universe reason why it works this way. They just explain, okay, mechanically, this is how it works. And that's it. And I think that is a huge detriment to the game. It means for lorehounds, this Player's Handbook is next to useless. There is so little lore in the vast majority of this book until you start getting to the appendices. There's so little lore in here that it literally is just a textbook, which I've never seen in a D&D product before. They've always been relatively good about creating lore in addition to their rules mechanics. And a lot of times that lore fueled the mechanics themselves. Not anymore. A really good example of this is the Warlock. I have not read through every single class, so I don't know if this is 100% true or not. But from what I'm getting, it looks like if they could, they tried to make sure that every class has their subclass chosen at 3rd level. And I'll just, really quickly, I'll go to the Sorcerer, because that's another one. I'm just going to check and see. The Sorcerer is another one that normally you would choose your class earlier. And now, of course, it won't load the damn page. Fine, I'm just going to go off of memory then, because D&D Beyond doesn't want me to actually look at the Sorcerer. So, I don't suppose I can do it from this page, can I? Warlock. Sorcerer's right before it. Okay, yeah, so I have it loaded on this page. It just won't let me load it on another one. Let's look. Sorcerer subclass, level 3. Yep. So it seems like, as far as I can tell, every single class now gets their subclass at level 3. Which is fine. You want to simplify the game to the point where you don't have people choosing subclasses at level 1 and level 2. Mostly because your subclass is is an increase in power, because you are getting more abilities and more customized abilities than someone that hasn't chosen their subclass yet. So lower level, like fighters, feel really, really underpowered until they get to 3rd level and they get to choose their subclass. And then they start feeling really, really good. So again, I totally get the idea behind that. However, for the Warlock, the subclass that they choose is their Pact. You know, Archfey, Devil, what are they again? I have to look again because I can't remember. Warlock. Archfey, Celestial, Fiend, our Great Old One are the 4 that are in the book. Also, every class has 4 subclasses, which I'm not upset about at all. I like that. It wasn't really the most fun thing in the world where like Rangers only had 2 subclasses, where Wizards had like 77. So the defining feature of your Warlock, you don't choose until you've been playing them for 2 levels. How do you get your magic before then? Like, the entire lore behind a Warlock is that they enter into a pact with a powerful being. Are we now to assume that Warlocks in 5.5 are so power hungry that they are entering into a pact with a creature they don't even know? They have no idea who this guy is, what power they have. They just go, ooh, he said he's got candy and puppies in his van. I'm going in there. It doesn't make sense. Now, I understand why they did that. The Warlock subclasses, even since 4th edition, the thing that differentiates Warlocks has almost always been what kind of pact they get. So I get that's the thing you had, because 2014 Warlocks actually had 2 different quote-unquote subclasses. You had, at 1st level, you would choose your pact, and then at 3rd level, you would choose your pact boon. And that was actually not quite as big a deal. It did change how you played, but it wasn't quite as impactful as choosing your pact. But that it did mean that at 3rd level, you did get a choice. So I understand the idea, well, if we're going to put all the subclasses at 3rd level, then that's it. I don't think it makes sense for you to choose your patron at 3rd level. It just doesn't make sense. Now, they try to kind of explain it away slightly when you're looking at pact magic. So, again, the amount of lore that is included in each one of these classes is very, very limited. For pact magic, it is 2 sentences. Through a cult ceremony, you have formed a pact with a mysterious entity to gain magical powers. The entity is a voice in the shadows, its identity unclear, but its boon to you is concrete. The ability to cast spells. That is the entirety of the lore for your character you get involving how your pact is formed. 2 sentences that basically say you don't know who you just signed a contract with, but they offered you magic, and that's all that matters. No. I mean, if we look at the same thing in the 2024 version, or the 2014 version, first of all, the introduction to the Warlock is significantly longer. You have a lot of other things. And then when we look at, we can go specifically to pact magic. Otherworldly patron, you struck a bargain with an otherworldly being of your choice. The Archday, the Fiend, the Great Old One. And then your arcane research and the magic bestowed upon you by your patron has given you facility with spells. So there's not really that much more lore there. But when you look at the introduction, you have easily 1.5 pages to 2 pages of lore for the 2014 Warlock, whereas the Warlock in 2024, you have technically 3 paragraphs. The last of those paragraphs, quote unquote, is 2 sentences. The one before that is 1 compound sentence. So in all actuality, you barely have a paragraph of lore to explain why you would want to be a Warlock. And that tends to be the overriding methodology, I guess, of D&D 5.5. And that's the thing that's really confusing to me. Because every single version of D&D has had a 0.5 version. when you look at original D&D, they started adding supplements and the things like that. And then the kind of quote-unquote 0.5 version of it was when they split it into basic and advanced. That was it, because it was technically the same game with almost the same rules. They just had a more complicated version, a more simple version. For second edition, it actually started with basic and advanced. And fun fact, the reason that there was basic and advanced had nothing to do with them wanting to have like a simple version and an advanced version, and everything to do about not wanting to pay people for certain things. Check that one out sometime. So when we get to third edition, it's the first time that they actually acknowledge, well, this is our big upgrade. They released D&D 3.5. And 3.5 was significantly more complex than base third edition. There was quite a few changes that they made that just kind of quality of life changes made the game easier to play, but they just added a ton more complexity to it. When you get to fourth edition, 4.5 was called the Essentials, and that was technically designed to be a simplifying aspect of it, where Essentials classes had less choices that you had to make, they had less powers that you had to use, everything was just easier to run. But it didn't simplify anything that was already there. It simply added basically another version of the game, new classes that didn't replace the old classes. They were just completely new classes that if you didn't want all the complexity that was built into fourth edition, you could play an Essentials character. Now in fifth edition, they have basically taken all of the current classes aside from the Artificer and simplified them significantly. Almost every single class has less choices to make in combat, less choices to make out of combat, and less choices to make while they are creating their character and leveling up their character. The entirety of D&D 5.5 seems to be 5th edition is too complicated, let's simplify it. That just kind of blows me away, because 5th edition was never an extremely complicated game compared to something like Pathfinder, and it's unbelievably simple. Compare it to earlier editions of D&D, and it was already very simple. Obviously, 3rd edition and 3.5, there's no comparison. You might as well compare, Powered by the Apocalypse to GURPS. 4th edition was slightly more simple than 3rd edition, and then 5th edition was even more simple than 4th edition. And most of the complexity that they got rid of was just complexity for complexity's sake. If our game has more choices and more things that you have to do, that must mean that it's a better game. No, it just means that it takes longer to do the exact same thing. 5th edition was a really, really nice kind of happy medium between there was enough options to make choices and make unique characters. And now they have stripped away the vast majority of those choices and made everything significantly more uniform. It almost feels kind of like an MMO. What I mean by that is not so much as like, oh, they're gamifying this and they're taking part. No. What I mean is in something like, Final Fantasy XIV is a really good example of this. There are 4 different tank classes. They are the Warrior, the Paladin, the Gunbreaker, and the Dark Knight. They all technically play differently, but they all have versions of the same things. Like, all of them have a basic combo that includes a self-heal. Every single one of them has something that lets them regain hit points as part of their base combo. Certain classes have better versions of it than other, but all of them have something along those little lines. They all have what I call a holy shit button, which is basically they activate an ability and they become immune to everything for a set amount of time. Sorry, I gotta readjust my keyboard here. It's just falling off my little table. And that's kind of what the classes are starting to feel like to me. Now, again, I haven't read through all of them. It's possible that I have just randomly selected the most simplistic classes. Oh, another thing that's interesting about chapter 2, which is about creating a character. They actually have a list in chapter 2. They have a table that tells you the complexity of each class. So to give you guys an idea, barbarians are listed as average complexity. Bards are listed as high complexity. Fighters are listed as low complexity. And when I was looking through this, I found a few things that I thought was interesting. The high complexity classes are Bard, Druid, Monk, Sorcerer, and Warlock. The low complexity classes are Fighter and Rogue. And Rogue specifically being low complexity surprised me when I actually read the Rogue class, because I would consider it anything but low complexity. And then everything else is average. Paladin, Ranger, Cleric, Barbarian, and Wizard. That's another thing I find really, really fascinating, is that the Wizard is considered an average complexity. So they're listing the classes and telling you how difficult they are to play, how complex they are, which is a weird thing to do. Again, I have seen this exact thing in MMOs. Specifically, if you've ever played D&D online, one of the things it will tell you is complexity of class and their solo ability. A lot of other MMOs, I think Black Desert does a similar thing, where one of the things it'll do is when you're choosing your class, it'll say complexity, advanced, complexity, basic, stuff like that. So that in and of itself I find very, very strange. Especially since they're not accurate. Like, I don't believe, because of how they simplified the choices that you have to make for the classes that I looked over. And just for anyone wondering which classes I've actually looked over, I read through the Fighter, the Monk, the Ranger, the Rogue, and the Warlock. So of the 12 classes, I've read a little under half of them, which is why this is a first impression and not an in-depth review. And everything is more simplistic. Everything, there's less description, there are less choices, there's less everything. D&D 5.5 is significantly more simple to understand than D&D 5th edition. And I don't understand why. I have heard a lot of complaints about 5th edition, especially the last couple of years, where D&D YouTube has been just dedicated to the idea of D&D is the worst game that has ever been created, and it is corrupting the moral fiber of the tabletop community. Like, anything they could possibly do to bash D&D in general, but specifically D&D 5th edition, they would. You know, a complaint I never heard about D&D 5th edition is it was too complex. For a lot of people complain that it's not complex enough, especially the Pathfinder bros. They will go on for hours upon hours telling you how simplistic and boring 5th edition is compared to Pathfinder 1st edition or 2nd edition. I've never heard someone say D&D is too complex for me. And so the fact that everything in this book seems to be, well, let's make this as simple as physically possible, feels weird. There's some other things that I'm not particularly fond of. Probably the one that I'm most, I don't know if I want to say upset about, but the one that I am least, makes the least amount of sense to me, is the change to the 2-weapon fighter feat, or what is it called? Let's see if I can actually open this up now. It's a general feat. Now we have a bunch of different versions of feats, which is another thing that annoys the hell out of me, because we don't need different kinds of feats. We never did. But now we have origin feats, we have general feats, we have fighting style feats, we have epic boon feats. I get it. You like the feat system. You don't need 4 different flavors of the exact same thing. That's like saying, well, you really should try our different hamburgers. We have the regular, we have the normal, we have the basic, and then we have the popular. It's the same sandwich 4 times. The only difference is when you can take them. It's that. There's no reason to make fighting styles feats, because the only time you can take a fighting style feat is if something specifically tells you to take a fighting style feat, which is how it worked before. There's no reason to reclassify them as feats. Epic boons, I'm still not a fan of. They're dumb. But when we look at... I want to see what it's called again, because I can't remember if it's... I think it's dual wielder, right? Is that what it is? Yeah, dual wielder. So, dual wielder. The old version of dual wielder gave you 2 benefits. One, you could use 2-weapon fighting when the weapons weren't light. That is how feats like this, or abilities like this, have worked since, I know, at least 2nd edition. I can't remember how it worked in 1st edition or basic, but there was always some way to reduce the 2-weapon fighting penalties that you get using larger 2-handed weapons. And in some earlier editions, you were actually able to, I think in 3rd edition it was called Monkey Grip. You could actually use 2-weapon fighting with 2-handed weapons. If you had a high enough strength score. I think is mostly limited to barbarians, but it's a cool thing. So that's how it used to work. Oh, and it increased your AC by 1, which was basically a way to kind of offset the fact that you can't use a shield when doing that, and to kind of show that using 2 weapons, I mean, traditionally, the way that 2-weapon fighting and dual wielding has worked in history is one of your weapons would be a defensive weapon, one of your weapons would be an offensive weapon, for the most part. And depending on the particular style of dual wielding that you were doing, something like rapier and dagger, the dagger was always your defensive weapon, and the rapier was always your attacking weapon. But it actually there was a disadvantage to that, because your opponent always knew where your defenses were going to come from. And so there was a specific style of fencing called the Florentine style of fencing, where you actually used 2 rapiers. You used a pair of rapiers. And the thing that made it so effective was you still generally had a defensive rapier and an offensive rapier, but they would switch depending on the situation. So you might parry with one and attack with another, and then immediately turn around to parry with the one you just attacked with, and then attack with the other one. It's an extremely effective thing. So the idea of being proficient in wielding 2 weapons, throughout history, using 2 weapons, you always had to learn how to defend with them, and having an additional thing that you could defend with that wasn't a shield was useful. It wasn't as useful as having a shield, which is why it's a +1 versus a +2. It's still very useful. The new version of dual wielding, when you take the attack action on your turn and attack with a weapon that has the light property, you can make 1 extra attack as a bonus action later on the same turn with a different weapon, which must be a melee weapon that lacks the 2-handed property. You don't add your ability modifier to the extra attack's damage unless the modifier is negative. And then quick draw, you can draw or stow 2 weapons that lack the two-handed property. You normally able to only draw and stow 1. That was the other thing about 2-weapon fighting that no one ever paid attention to. That kept there. So, for the first time in 50 years of Dungeons and Dragons, you cannot dual wield 2 longswords. And I don't understand why. Part of me wondered, and I'm going to look this up here real quick. Part of me wonders if this was a consequence of the weapon mastery property, because theoretically maybe wielding 2 longswords would give you the ability to use their weapon mastery to twice, which would completely break the game or something. So I'm going to look here and see exactly what is the weapon mastery of a longsword. It's sap. If you hit a creature with this weapon, that creature has disadvantage on its next attack roll before the start of your next turn. Sap doesn't stack. So if you were wielding 2 longswords, you couldn't sap the same creature twice. You might be able to sap 2 different creatures, but is there a light weapon that has sap? I'm just checking to see if I can find a light weapon that has sap, and I'm not seeing it. It looks like it's exclusively a one-handed weapon thing. So maybe that's it. I just don't understand. Because again, 2-weapon fighting in 5th edition has never been the greatest choice. Like, a lot of times, if you want to play a character that's using 2 weapons, you have to sacrifice a lot to do it. Because most classes that can benefit from 2-weapon fighting also tend to be pretty bonus action reliant. And I've looked over the paladin too. I forgot about that. And that means that you generally have to choose between making your additional attack, which really isn't that useful, or doing whatever your class is built around using their bonus action for. So 2-weapon fighting was already kind of a niche thing. Like, there really wasn't. The things that were really broken in 5th edition was Great Weapon Master feat and Sharpshooter feat, because both of those were unbelievably powerful, especially at low levels, but even at high levels they were crazy powerful. 2-weapon fighting was really just never that powerful. It just wasn't. So I don't understand why they decided that they had to nerf that particular ability. Now, an interesting thing about this, and I'm going to check to see if I just don't remember it from the last one. But dual wielder. That's even more interesting. So the original version of dual wielder, there's no stat requirements for it. There were certain, there weren't many, but there were certain feats, like the grappler feat in 2014, you had to have a strength of 13 or higher in order to be able to take that. There weren't a ton of those, but there were a few. Dual wielder was not one of them. There were no stat requirements to be able to do dual wielding. When we look at the new one, it requires either a strength or dexterity score of 13 or higher. Which again doesn't make sense. I don't know why they felt the need to nerf dual wielder. It also doesn't give you a bonus to your AC, which again doesn't make sense. A +1 bonus to your AC is not a massive deal. It really isn't. In 5th edition with bounded accuracy, +1, you're going to get hit, 5% less. It's not that big a deal, but it's big enough that you'd notice it. I just don't understand why, especially when we're starting to look at things like paladins now. Paladin Smite is a spell, which is weird, but fine. Let's go with that. And it takes your bonus action to do it, which is not cool. What used to be a free action that just happened when you attacked, now not only is limited to once per turn, but also requires you to use 2 actions to make a single attack. From an action economy standpoint, that's not good. There's going to be very few instances where using your Paladin Smite is going to be advantageous for you, depending on what other bonus actions you have, including dual wielding. If you're a Vengeance Paladin and you cast Hunter's Mark, which already uses your bonus action for 1 turn, now getting an additional 2d8 damage from a smite is nice, but in order to get that 2d8 damage, you now have to give up a d6 of weapon damage, your strength or dexterity mod did the damage, and the Hunter's Mark damage. Your base level smite is no longer useful to you at all, because now the opportunity cost isn't there. And that was another thing I found interesting. In the rules section, it talks about in the original version of D&D 5th edition, they explain in combat you have 3 actions, or technically 4 actions available to you. You have a move, you have an action, you have a bonus action, and you have a reaction. Now you have a move and an action. Bonus actions are no longer defined as something that your character has access to. It specifically says you only have a bonus action if something in your class or a magic item or something gives you a bonus action. So bonus action is now something that is bestowed upon your character by a feature. It is not inherent to the rules themselves, which mechanically doesn't really change anything. You know, your bonus actions, if you had a bonus action available but you had nothing to use it with, it was worthless. You might as well not have it. But the fact that they changed that wording is weird. They also changed how spellcasting works. It used to be if you cast a leveled spell or if you cast a spell as a bonus action, you could not cast another leveled spell in that to the turn. Now you can only cast 1 leveled spell per turn. And the fighter's action surge no longer allows you to cast spells with it. Mostly because there were a lot of wizards that would take I think it was just a 1 level dip, 1 or 2 level dip into fighter to get action surge. And then would use that to double cast spells, because as long as they weren't using it as a bonus action, they could theoretically cast 2 6 level spells back to back. So they changed that, and again, I understand that process. The reason that they created that rule before was specifically to deal with sorcerers being able to quicken spells, and now they've made just a more simple version of that. But again, a lot of the choices that they made in here, I just don't like. Like a good example, the monk. They changed how the monk worked. I've talked about this before. A lot of the properties of the monk I actually liked, but I'd only seen people talking about them. I hadn't actually read the rules. So I went and I actually read the monk, because of course I did. And Shadow Monk. My favorite character I've ever created. I try to recreate them in literally every single RPG I've ever played, including video games. It's Aether, my Shadow Monk. He was the first 5th edition character that I played for a significant length of time. Got him from level 5 all the way up to level 17 or 18, I can't remember which, in the D&D Adventurers League. He's a fantastic character. The Shadow Monk in 2024 is a significantly more simple character. And they didn't change that much. But what they did is 3rd level in 2014, you got access to a bunch of different spells. You got the Darkness spell, you got the Silence spell, you got Pass Without a Trace, and you got Dark Vision. I used all 4 of those spells constantly. Other than Darkness. Darkness was the one that I used the absolute least, but every so often I would still use it. Pass Without a Trace, Silence, and Dark Vision were absolutely essential spells. The new 5.5 version, all you get is Darkness. Now, there are benefits. The 2014 version, they cost 2 key points to cast. Now they only Darkness only costs 1 key point. And the thing that messed with a lot of Shadow Monks in 2014 was you couldn't see in Magical Darkness. So if you cast Darkness, the enemy couldn't see, but neither could you. There really wasn't a ton of benefit as far as min-maxers were concerned. Well, if I can't see and they can't see, then I'm not at an advantage, and this is the dumbest thing ever. There's actually a lot of really, really useful things you could use the Darkness spell for. I actually used it specifically for this once, and then the DM, because he was an asshole and had issues, changed how the monsters worked to make it so that my spell was completely useless. But one of the most beneficial things about the Darkness spell is if they can't see you, they can't make opportunity attacks. They also can't make ranged attacks against you because those things require line of sight. Literally anything that requires line of sight, Darkness stops because you can't see through it. And even if they do have the ability to see through Magical Darkness over a certain range, as long as part of your Darkness spell is outside of that range, which most monsters do not have, like True Sight infinite. They'll have True Sight out to 30 feet or 60 feet. If they're taking pot shots at you from 100 feet away, putting up just a sphere of darkness between you and them means that they can't see you because part of the darkness is outside of their True Sight or the ability to see in Magical Darkness, things like that. The time that I used it in the D&D Adventure League, we were in a grave thing, like a tomb, and all of these vampire spawn started attacking us, and we were in a real bad situation because they were starting to paralyze and all these other things. So the team itself was spread out because we were in these really, really skinny hallways and we couldn't really do much. And the vampire spawn had spider climbing, so they were climbing on the roof and we couldn't really hurt them. And it was just getting really bad. And so I went, you know what? I'm going to cast Darkness, and then all of us can move because all the vampire spawn are on the ceiling. We can all move, get out of there, and then get them to a point where we can kind of bottleneck them and fight them. So I do that, and I start running past these, and the DM goes, well, you take 4 opportunity attacks. I'm like, how? Well, because you just ran past them. I said, yeah, but it's Darkness. They can't see in Magical Darkness. These ones can. No, they can't. You're not allowed to randomly change how monsters work in the D&D Adventures League. That's against the rules. These ones can. I said, so I just wasted my Darkness spell? Yes. I said, fine. Then I stopped concentration on it. Guess we'll have to do something else. I teleport out. Is that okay? Am I allowed to teleport? Because that's an ability I have? So, yeah. Now, the new version of the Monk, you can see in your Magical Darkness, but no one else can. Unless they can see in Magical Darkness too. But you no longer have Pass Without a Trace. You no longer have Silence. You no longer have Dark Vision. And everything else about it is more simplistic. Yes, you now have an ability to use like Patient Defense without burning a key point. There's like a lower version of Patient Defense and a higher version that requires key points. But for the most part, they're not really that different. So, yeah, overall, the only thing that I've really liked about 5.5 thus far, and again, I've not read the whole thing yet, so it's possible that I've missed something big in here, and there are aspects of this that I'm really, really going to like. But thus far, the only thing that I've liked is the new healing spells. And the only thing they changed is they doubled the amount that spells heal. It's it. Cure Wounds no longer cures 1d8, cures 2d8. And then for each level above 1, it adds an additional 2d8. It's all they changed. It's the simplest fix ever. And I don't know if it actually fixes how useless healing is in 5th edition, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. Again, I really like D&D as a system. I think D&D 5th edition, the first version, is probably one of the best designed versions of D&D that has ever existed. It's a good system. But this rules update just seems like a step backwards. This 100% feels like the Essentials line for D&D 4th edition. The difference being, instead of giving you more options, giving you new classes in order to give you a more simplified version of the game, they've taken all the stuff that was already in there, cut out a lot of it, and then given it back to you as, well, look at this new thing. It's not really new. You've just taken away things from us, repackaged it, and told us that it's better. It's not. Weapon mastery is interesting. I haven't looked through all of the properties yet. But overall, I'm thinking it's interesting. And I'm thinking I might allow it in my game, though the fact that you have to specifically choose which weapons you have mastery over is a little bit annoying, to say the least. Mostly because in D&D, you don't change weapons that much. You really don't. Now, weapon mastery does give you an incentive to actually use different kinds of weapons, but it just doesn't happen that much. And I think almost every single class that gets weapon mastery in some way, shape, or form can change what weapons they have mastery in some way, shape, or form. Different ones have different ways to do it, but again, it's one of those things. It's like, oh, we're putting a limitation that doesn't mean anything. It's about as limiting as saying, well, we're going to put speed limits on every road in the world. The speed limit is 407 miles per hour. Yeah, it's technically a limitation. No car can travel that fast. That is faster than the speed of sound. It's a pointless limitation. No one is ever going to be limited by that. So why in the world would you put the limitation there other than kind of this theater of, well, yeah, we're trying to make this more difficult? It's not. It's giving you the illusion of choice. And that is kind of what this whole thing does. Like I said, once I feel better, I'm going to do an in-depth review of the book and go into everything, every minute detail. But as of right now, I kind of like weapon mastery, though the actual things that weapon mastery does is really, really limited. And quite a few of them, the weapon mastery effects, there are already other ways to do that significantly better in the game. Like, there's a few weapon mastery ones that will do things like allow you to push a target 5 feet. Well, there's like 4 different classes that you have an innate ability to push targets. And unarmed strikes can now push targets. It's not that useful. Yes, forced movement can be very, very useful, but there's so many different ways to get forced movement that having it as a weapon mastery property is almost useless. Especially since you can only choose like 2 or 3 different weapon master weapons with weapon mastery. So it's not even like, well, I want to be able to use sap and I want to be able to use vex. No, I want to be able to use scimitars and short swords. That's what you can do, despite the fact that both of them, I believe, have the same weapon mastery. Let me check here before I say the wrong thing. So yeah, short sword. Oh, short sword has vex. Scimitar has nick. But yeah, if you went scimitar and daggers, they have the same weapon mastery property, the nick. Which again is a cool ability, it's written poorly. It says when you make the extra attack of the light property, you can make it as part of the attack action instead of as a bonus action. You can make this extra attack only once per round. Does that mean that you can now also use your bonus action to make another attack? Or because it says instead of as a bonus action, you can now use your bonus action for something else? Again, it's... everything in here just seems worse, for lack of a better term. There's nothing in here that really excites me, aside from the Rogue. The Rogue, they've taken Cunning Action, which used to be a defining feature of the Rogue. They've given that ability to like dash and disengage as a bonus action. They've given that to like 3 or 4 different classes. And there's feats that allow you to do that. There's weapon mastery abilities that allow you to do that. So it's almost pointless for the Rogue to have anymore. The class does not care. The class and the subclasses do not care about Cunning Action anymore. It's just something that they kept in there because everyone else can do it, so why not? But they've changed how sneak attack works. When you get to fifth level, you get this thing called Cunning Strike, where basically you can sacrifice some of your sneak attack dice to add additional effects. So things like Withdrawal is one of them. You roll 1 less d6 on your sneak attack, but then immediately after the attack, you can move up to half your speed without provoking an opportunity attack, which is effectively disengage. Just adds a little bit more movement on top of the disengage. So that, to me, is really interesting. And as you level up, you get additional, more Cunning Strike options, which is really cool. It makes playing the Rogue significantly more tactical. Because the old version of the Rogue was, I use my bonus action to hide, I pop out, so I have advantage on the attack roll, I shoot the bad guy, get sneak attack, and then I find a place to be hidden again. And that's all I do. Playing a Rogue was unbelievably basic and simple in base D&D 5th edition. 5.5 with Cunning Strike, it is significantly more complex. And you actually have to make choices about how you want to use your sneak attack. Do you want to sacrifice some of the damage to add certain things, certain detrimental features to the attack or not? Like, there's a lot of really cool things, which makes the Rogue significantly more complex to play. So yeah. Overall, from what I've read, my little first impression here, I'm not real pleased with D&D 5.5. It's more simplistic, and the way that they simplified things, there are very few abilities or features in the game that were not made less useful. Everything is a nerf aside from a few small things. And they really, really focused on the non-nerfs in all of the promotional material, which makes sense. But yeah, this just feels like a massive nerf to the entire game. It almost feels punitive. It's almost like, well, you guys kept breaking our game and playing it in ways that we didn't want you to, so now we're just not going to let you do that. And if you guys remember when I was doing D and Done, when I was talking about the 1D&D playtest, that was the overarching feeling that I got from most of what I saw in the 1D&D playtest was forcing people to play characters in very specific ways, taking away the bard's ability to do a lot of different things to force them to be a support character. I haven't read the bard in this, so I don't know how much of that made it into the real thing, but they did everything they could to go, no, Bards are silly. They try to fuck everything, and they're support classes. They don't get to get the killing blow on anything because that's not what bards do. Well, the 5th edition bard, you 100% could be a DPS powerhouse if you built the character right. No, that's not how we want you to play your character. We will tell you how you play your character. And that's what it feels like here. It feels like, you know what, you guys were doing too many things that we didn't want you to do. So now we're going to make it so you can't do that. You will play the game the way we want you to play it, or you won't play our game. And it's weird because I've never gotten that feeling from any of the promotional material, any of the conversations I've had with any of the creators, any of the conversations I've read from any of the creators. Everything about this, they were like, no, we want to make the game better. We want to, give people more ways to play more. And everything I've read thus far has been less choice, less room for interpretation, and just less options. Less flavor, less everything. Anyway, that's my opinion. The meds are just about completely gone right now. So I am feeling really, really bad now. And I need to go. So that is all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.